The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be back again with you today. And we have a really interesting topic. Today, we're going to be talking about boundaries. Oh, my goodness. Who doesn't have problems with boundaries? Sometimes I do. I know it's not that difficult to imagine scenarios where we might get stuck, like saying yes, maybe to a movie we really don't want to go to, or agreeing for, spending time with somebody who we actually feel a little uncomfortable with, or saying yes when we mean no, or no when we mean yes. So not having people come into our personal space, or inviting people that we really want into our personal space instead of actually feeling maybe uncomfortable with doing that. So, wonder where you're struggling with your boundaries. And we are very fortunate today because we are going to be speaking with Juliane Taylor Shore, who just wrote a book that was launched in 2023 called Setting Boundaries That Stick. I've got the book in front of me, and this is really an interesting book because from what I've read, Juliane, or as she likes to be called, Jules, really integrates neurobiology to help you come up with strategies to rewire the way your brain works around setting boundaries and learning how to feel safer and more connected in your life because you're setting better boundaries. She's got some great approaches within the book, and she also has this really lovely multi-step process for addressing the creation of boundaries in a number of different settings and with different kinds of people, and to address different issues that you might struggle with. So let's get into it. Welcome, Jules. Thank you for joining us.
Oh my gosh, Dr. Anna, thank you for having me. This is so delightful. I'm so glad to be here with you.
I'm glad you're here as well, Jules. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us, the audience, and kind of help us to understand, how you started in your work and what moved you into this issue around boundaries, particularly, which I think is a huge issue. But before we do that, I want to just invite our fantastic listeners to email us at instudio101@gmail.com if you have questions or comments or have something to say that you either want to share a comment with Jules or ask a question. We love to hear from you. So let's hear from you to start with, Jules.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm in Austin, Texas, and I'm a therapist, private practice, and I also teach neurobiology and interpersonal neurobiology internationally. And I got into that part of this work. It's kind of a funny story, actually. It's so when I went to grad school, I was an auto mechanic. In the beginning, in the beginning,
This is a big leap
this
from
is
auto mechanic to a therapist.
right. So I was turning wrenches still during the day, and I went to grad school at night. Mostly because I went to therapy myself in really hard moments. I was in a really hard situations in my own life, and found therapy despite myself, because I thought it was kind of silly going in, like a lot of folks do, and then was transformed by it and had a great experience and decided I wanted to do that. But I was still working in the field and in fixing cars during the day. And I get to grad school, and there were no classes really about the brain. And I thought it was super weird, because I wouldn't ask myself or one of the guys I was working with to fix a brake system if they didn't know how to brake system worked. And it felt odd that my grad school didn't have any neurobiological education, since I was going to be helping people have a different kind of relationship with their brain. And that took me down the road of neurobiology. And that has led me to practice in the way that I practice, really thinking about how to help clients work with the brains that we're born with. A lot of times we want to do things in a way that works against our energy and information flow patterns. So I really want to help people understand a little bit about how your brain works. How can you work with it to make your life a little bit easier? So I teach people and clinicians all over the world about these topics. So that was, yeah, that was my beginning into neurobiology, was really just feeling very confused by my
it sounds
program.
like it. That's really interesting, because it almost sounds like this gap in your teaching, in your education, kind of opened up a whole pathway for you that you needed to fill in your own gaps. I had a similar situation when I was in grad school, that there really wasn't a lot of training at that time. There is now tons of training on trauma. And I know it was shocking to me, because very early on in my career, when I started to do work with individuals, I kept on getting referrals to clients who had these massive trauma histories. And my profs would say to me, "Oh, that's a complicated case. You shouldn't have been referred that client." But it just seemed like so many of the clients that I was working with had trauma backgrounds. Now, I was fortunate in my undergraduate, I started studying neuropsych right away, and I loved those courses. So I completely understand the meaning and the importance of having that sense of, what is really going on here. But my gosh, you went from being a mechanic to being a therapist and a neurobiopsych teacher.
Yeah,
That's really interesting.
it was quite a jump. It was quite a jump. And I found myself really, I work with a lot of trauma and a lot of couples and a combination therein. So a lot of my work is couples, one or both of whom have some sort of complex traumatic background, and helping folks work through those things. And what I was realizing, I didn't start out going, "Oh, I'm going to talk about boundaries." What I was realizing was that so many of my clients were struggling with these hard realities, and boundary work was going to help with those hard realities. So, like, here's a hard reality: not everything somebody else does is going to be okay with you. And they're probably not a mind reader and may not even know about what's okay with you and not okay with you. Oh, there's a lot of hard reality in that. How are we going to help support you? One, know what it is that's okay with you and not okay with you in the first place. Really greet you where you are in your context, in your cultural space, so that you're picking things, your behaviors are really matching what feels right for you and your integrity. not what's right for me and my integrity. Oh, how do I help set up practices where people can really get to know themselves and slow down and wonder about these things? And then, make that hard leap about communicating that with someone else in a way that still feels in their integrity and actually builds connection more than separation.
Yeah, and that's a really hard ask, especially if somebody feels that one, by sharing who they really are, they feel too exposed,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe they don't feel that they're entitled to have any rights, or that their voice gets them into more trouble than good. There's lots of reasons why a person would actually choose to remain silent
Oh, for sure.
instead of having a voice. And it can be really complicated because there may be some steps that need to be put in place, or some inner learning that has to be put in place before somebody could actually move towards some of the work that you're recommending, the boundaries that stick.
For sure. Yeah, that's why I split boundaries into a couple of different broad categories. So I think of boundaries in that external form where we're talking about, where you might communicate what's okay or not okay with you, or you might do a thing. Oh, if this thing keeps happening, I'm going to have to make some space here. I might actually have an action that creates more of a boundary. That's more like the external boundary. And then there's also internal boundaries. So I think of that as a way to really wrap our hearts and heads around how different other people's minds are. And can we really listen to what feels true for us and what feels about us, and listen with acceptance as people who have differences are in front of us. And I talk about that as the psychological boundary. How do I work with what's called my mentalization neural network, which is a fancy word for the parts in your brain, the systems in your brain that are guessing what's happening in another person's mind and what's happening in yours, and marking that relationship really, really fast in your subcortical system. So I think about doing that kind of inner boundary work, or inner boundary work around containment. Can we put a pause between what we feel and what we do so our actions are really in alignment with our integrity? Can I do some physical boundary work? Can I know what feels good to my body and doesn't feel good to my body?
It's interesting because it starts to make me think about the things that I hear often from people when they start to reflect on what they don't like. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
something's happening in their life, and they know they don't like it, but their solution is not to address it. It's to argue with the reality of the world around them, and to insist that the way they want to deal with it is to change themselves so that they can say yes to the thing that they don't like.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're speaking truth. um, I feel like
That's rough.
it's rough, right?
Yeah.
And it makes so much sense because there are two pieces I think that make boundary work really, really hard. One is that all boundary work is really grief work. Because in order to base that a boundary is really important for me, then I also am facing that there's a reality in front of me that's really, really hard. And I'm going to have some of those grief experiences as I come into contact with that.
Okay, say more about this idea of grief work. What is it they may be grieving by actually moving forward with setting a better boundary?
Right. I think in order to do that, we probably have started, most of us start with some sort of direct request. Oh, could I have a change here?
Mhm.
And it hasn't gone well.
Mhm.
And already the disappointing thing has happened.
Mhm.
And I think of disappointment, and some disappointments are very minor and some are really profound, as a different word we're giving to grief. Oh, I'm letting myself come into really deep awareness, acceptance that this thing is happening and real in front of me.
Yeah, I might actually lose this relationship by saying I have a need that hasn't been met.
Right. It's absolutely possible for it to go into those big grief spaces where we really have a big shift in a relationship or even into a relationship. And it's also possible that it goes in those little mini spaces where, oh, I'm not going to get this thing I was hoping to get.
Mhm.
And that's going to mean I need to change something on my end to increase my okayness in the face of this moment. But in order to do that, I've probably already hit how sad I am or how hurt I am as I face this really hard reality. So grief work is a huge part of boundary work. And the other work about boundary work is vulnerability. Because what you're saying is I'm going to be more honest with myself and with other people about who I am. And that takes emotional risk. And so I think it's really hard. It's if you're struggling with boundaries, and we people who write books, we write the book we need, right? Boundary work is my inner work. Like that is a big part of what I work
Oh,
with in
thank
my.
you for saying that, Jules. That's brilliant. That's just brilliant. Yeah, that's really great because I think that's probably really true for a lot of people. And then, you end up saying, I need to really deeply and fully understand this. And I'm going to carve this out for myself so I can do a deep dive. This is for me. I'm going to
Yeah.
let this grow me up. The other thing that you had just said is, what happens, well, intuited, what happens when in the reality of asking for what I want, the answer is no, you're not going to get that, and certainly not from that person. What does it mean to become okay with stating our needs and then recognizing we don't have the right to demand or change another person, only
Mm-hmm.
to state our boundary and
Mm-hmm.
then to allow it to fall where it is.
Oof.
It's okay. It might not, you may not get what you want. You could repair that relationship, but you may not get what you want from it. You
Yeah.
might not be able to, have that person show up every Monday night or Sunday
Right.
afternoon for brunch. It's just not going to
It's
happen.
not
That's
going to
not the way
happen.
it's not happening. And, maybe that's okay.
Yeah. And there's so much. One, I think the journey through that is as unique as a fingerprint,
Mm.
which is why I write more about practices to support folks turning in and getting more curious about what's happening inside. Because I'm not one of those folks who can tell you, oh, in this situation, this boundary is unhealthy or this boundary is healthy. I don't think of boundaries in that way. I think they're more context dependent than that. I think they're more unique than that. And so, what I want to do is help people set up processes, practices that are going to help them support themselves to one, find out what is right for you. Ooh, can you be okay with this? Or do you need even more space? The person is not going to come to brunch every Sunday. Maybe that's okay to grieve and move through and be with the disappointment and be able to stay in that relationship. Or maybe something bigger is happening and actually it means lots more space in that relationship. Ooh, to do that inner work is really difficult to get clear with ourselves and really risk trusting our inner voice is really difficult work. And so when I think about, oh, what are healthy boundaries? I think about one, do we have practices and processes to help you explore what your truth is and risk trusting yourself a little bit more?
So there's two things that stand out for
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
in what you've just said right now. One is related to a tendency towards being self-sacrificing, and the other is a tendency to be entitled or self-serving. So these are two very, very different qualities that a
Mm-hmm.
person can have, maybe polar opposites,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because I do a lot of supervision and work with professional helpers, both in a professional context and also in a supervisory context. So I might see a client who's a helper, but I might also work with my team who are clinicians or helpers of a variety of sorts. And, you know, one of the things that I see very, very often is people who go into helping professions often find themselves with a tendency to be self-sacrificing, service-oriented people, and engaged with individuals who may have a tendency towards self-serving behaviors or narcissistic at the extreme.
Sure.
And, you know, some of the ways in which you're framing this, you know, I can see that there are people who have absolutely no problems asking for what they need, and other people who really suffer in setting a boundary and asking for what they need. And you have a really interesting statement in your book, in the section on boundaries and your brain. And you say, many of us are taught to be nice, to not hurt others by sharing our truth. That is a formula for disconnection. When we risk being clear with others, we have feelings of both fear and empowerment, such as nervousness, worry, clarity, relief, joy, and authenticity. When we do not risk being clear with others, we have the feeling that go along with hiding our truth, self-doubt, resentment, longing, shame, anger, loneliness, and sadness. And the one that stands out to me is resentment, right?
Resentment is one of my favorite feelings of all time. And it's because it flags me that I should have set a boundary or gotten clear with myself about something, and I haven't been yet. So it's like my little warning light. It's like my little yellow light on the highway that says, oh, by the way, watch out. You just already crossed a line for yourself. So resentment is a feeling I've come to cherish in myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it tells me, oop, there's another thread of where to do this boundary work. And it could be I wasn't clear with me, because I'm with you. So many of us who are doing this profession, and so many who we have so many helping professions all over, nurses and physicians and teachers and people who are building stuff for people in our communities. There's so many of us who have a tendency towards a little bit more self-sacrifice, a little bit more towards thinking about the well-being of the other ahead of the well-being of ourselves. And it ends up creating a space, if we're not careful with that, which is, you know what just got moved in me was how wonderful it is that there are so many people out there who want to serve and want to help. And it comes from such deep, lovely human spaces.
Yeah.
And when we're only looking at how much we're giving and only looking at what the other person might need, we can create real burnout spaces inside.
Oh, definitely.
Right? We can really forget about even wondering about what needs we have. And the truth is, it's vulnerable to face that we have needs too. It is.
Yeah, we can spend a lifetime being experts at helping other people and never really learn about what our own needs are. And, you know, I mean, the reality is if you're wired as a helper, that's always going to be an instinct, and it's always going to feel really good to be able to enact that in your life. Like yesterday, I know somebody who just had surgery, and I also know somebody who had an accident. So I packaged up 2 really beautiful baskets of fruit for each of these 2 separate people. My husband and I dropped them off, and it just felt on its own as a standalone, just really lovely. And it felt great to show up for these people that I think are really terrific people on the planet. And, you know, that stands on its own. But, you know, that giving capacity that's going to be there, but then there's this place of hunger and nourishment that we carry within inside of ourselves, and having a connection to that becomes very, very important as well. And I think your boundary kind of reflections relate a lot to, this I think dichotomy around the givers and the takers,
Mhm.
and whether there's a shared meeting space, and how to find that shared meeting space, or how to recognize when you're choosing relationships consistently where that shared meeting place is not available, and how that can really set you off in life to quite a bad place. I like that you have outlined so well your four boundary types as well, because I think people just think of boundaries as one thing, but the way you describe it with external, psychological, containing, and physical, help people to understand how this can actually be unexpected and a little complex.
It's really, really complex. And I want this book to serve as an invitation to your own complexity and having more depth and clarity about which boundary areas need service from you, need support, right?
Can you talk a little bit about your concept of rigid versus porous boundaries?
Absolutely. So I think of boundaries on a spectrum. And on one side of the spectrum would be really porous. We let a lot in, we put a lot out, right? And on the other side of the spectrum, we have rigid. We don't let a lot in, we don't let a lot out. Now, you could have here's a typical one that might go for those of us who feel more in that service space. We even could create burnout for ourselves. We probably are on the porous side with how much we take in about what people need, feedback. We take in everything to heart, and we probably are rigid on the containing boundary side. We actually don't speak our needs very well. We may not even know, we don't let ourselves know what our needs are, right? So I think of one, it's a spectrum, and two, it's a different spectrum for each boundary type. And so you can have a really unique combination for you with, here's where my boundaries are working well. Here's where they feel like they could use some extra support. So I don't think of health as in the middle of the spectrum. I think of health as flexibility along the spectrum that is context dependent for you and your life. So I've worked with plenty of people who are more on the introverted side and high sensitive side, and their physical boundary home base may be a little closer to that more rigid side. I want a little bit less touch. I need a little bit less stimulation. It's too much for me to go to the club. My physical needs need quiet and space, and my home base is there. And I'm thinking about somebody I worked with who would absolutely qualify here and had a kiddo, and that kiddo was super extroverted. And there were moments when what was right for this person was to take that kiddo to the birthday party and stretch along that spectrum so that she moved a little bit more porous sometimes than was her natural home base. And that was healthy and right for her. And that's great. Oh, I can put myself in that space and I can do my boundary work with my edges and really take care of myself after and move into that more porous than I would normally go to if it were just up to me. But I love my kiddo and I want her to go to the birthday party. Right. So sometimes we might move towards more porous on one of our boundary spectrums because it's really, really healthy to do that. That's great. And other times we might move really rigid. So sometimes I might be in a space where I'm actually not taking anything in. I think about I'm a woman walking down the street and somebody starts catcalling me. I move to my rigid boundary. That's the absolute healthiest thing I could do. I don't feel comfortable saying a lot to that person. There's a whole group of 3 dudes there. It feels too threatening to me. Let me honor my truth, my context, move to a walled off position for a minute and not let any of that in, but also maybe not let a lot out because it feels too dangerous to do that. So I don't think of me saying, oh, here's what health should be for you as the wisest way to help people find their way to good boundary work. I think instead I lean into what processes and practices can I help you take on where you can become clear about the complexity of your boundary system and how to support it moving towards a little bit more health, and whatever that means for you is exactly right.
Now, you've done this beautiful job of explaining your steps to setting a boundary. We're going to get into that. But first, I want to read a couple of emails from our listeners. And, we have usually between 3,000 to 4,000 live listeners. So we've got some really, really, usually very, very intelligent and nuanced comments. So let's just go through a few of these. This one is from Abdi Samad, and Abdi Samad says, well appreciated and proactively participating in psychological boundaries here online. Boy, do we ever need that, eh? When we're online, there's so much complexity with everything we get exposed to online. So what about that element of it?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I love this idea of having our psychological boundary between ourselves and our computer screens.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Because one of the things I want our psychological boundary to do for us is to really live in the reality that your mind and other people's minds are different. We want different things. We have different goals. We have different values. And not everybody out there is saying something that is about you and or true. Mm-hmm. And so I really want to help us not take in and get injured by what doesn't feel true and what doesn't feel about us, so that we can greet the other person with as much curiosity as we would like closeness to that human. Right? So I can listen with acceptance, and I can listen with curiosity to what somebody else is saying, and I'll engage with them if I want to be close with them. And sometimes online, I notice we're engaging not necessarily to grow closeness. Right. So I'm curious if psychological boundary work could help us even have a different discourse in that space by feeling curious and engaging if connection with somebody is something we want, or if it's not, be curious about what gets stirred in us and can we keep out what feels painful and what is not about us.
It's like you were saying before, you're walking down the street and people are trying to engage with you. It doesn't feel good or right or safe. And so you do what you need to do to take care of yourself, and not doing anything is actually completely acceptable. We don't have to do something.
Oh, yeah.
We don't actually have to respond in all cases. And that is a reasonable response as well.
And that is a boundary.
It is a boundary. Exactly.
That's a boundary. Choosing not to speak is also a boundary.
Exactly. This is from Gloria, who says, hello, Bear Psychology. That's the name of the radio show. Wow. Do we ever need this book today? I love the name, Jules. Thanks for sharing. Gloria is from Texas as well. And I am actually just going to remind people of the name of your book and where they can get it. So it's Setting Boundaries That Stick by Juliane Taylor Shore, who likes to be called Jules, how neurobiology can help you rewire your brain to feel safe, connected, and empowered. And I will just say that one of the things I almost always do when I recommend a book to one of my clients or somebody online is I go to Goodreads, because I find that Goodreads is a really good place to kind of see what people are saying about books. And you have a lot of really good reviews on Goodreads. I don't know if you know that.
I have no idea. I have not read them.
Yeah, so you should go to Goodreads, and you'll get a sense that people are really receiving your book really well. So I'm letting you know that. And of course, people can get it online, on Amazon, or at any bookseller. It looks like you've got good coverage. Here's another one. Hello, Jules. I have this is from Dave. I have a 2004 BMW that is sputtering. Only kidding. Did you ever think of doing a car repair radio show? That would be interesting. Love your book.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks to people who are writing that in. And that sounds like a very fun side project. When I have time, I'll try to take it on.
So what about the psychology of car repair?
Right? Well, let's just be with how much we're taught that it's way too hard to learn, but it's not.
Oh, I love that. Okay. Are
I
you
think the
still
same.
fixing your own cars?
You know what? I don't have time anymore, and so I gave that up. But I love talking to mechanics, and they usually, because of my background, will let me into the shop and we'll shop talk for a little while when I take my car in.
Oh, nice.
Also, I drive a Honda, so Honda
No
plug.
BMW.
I don't need a lot of car repair because of that. No, my car's really new right now, thank goodness. But you know what I was thinking about is actually I think I use the same headspace towards the auto repair work as I do towards teaching neurobiology. It is complex. How cars work, how brains work. Brains are 10,000 times more complex. And sometimes it feels intimidating, like, oh no, I'll never understand this. And when I was in auto repairs and managing shops and turning wrenches, one of the things I love to do was to help empower people to understand more about how their car worked so that they didn't feel so scared going into the garage. And I think the same thing about your brain. Yeah, it's complex. No, you don't need to understand everything. And you can develop an educated and really compassionate relationship with the brain you have. Ooh, a train just went by and honked. I don't know if you all could hear that.
No, I didn't.
If I
But
got
it was cheering you on, I think, Jewel.
it was cheering you on. So I'm really passionate about helping people be really compassionate with themselves and the brains we're born with and all their neurodivergence and neurodiversity and brilliance. And so I just want people to have the tools they need to discover how awesome our minds are.
Well, this is a really good next question then. And this comes from a listener who says, hello, doctors. What is actually meant by neurodiverse relationships?
Oh, well,
yeah, that's right. Just popped up on my screen.
I love this question. So great question. I think different people probably mean different things. And when I think about neurodiverse or neurodivergent relationships, I've heard them called both ways. I think about folks who maybe have sometimes people will call it neurospicy differences, dyslexia, ADHD, autism spectrum, and somebody who does not have those differences. And that having a relationship where we honor our brain's differences, which, by the way, takes a ton of psychological boundary work, where we say yes to the differences and collaborate through those differences, can be a lot of really amazing work. When you're talking about couples who maybe have some differences there.
Oh, yeah, that is an interesting conversation, recognizing that the way my brain works is very different than the way your brain works. Yeah, that I think I see that in my own marriage. I'm married to a very sweet guy, but he definitely looks at life and thinks in a very unique way. I'm highly, highly detail oriented, and he is always looking at the big picture. And it's like sometimes I'm like, well, how did you arrive at that conclusion? It's completely different than the way that I would look at things. And so, yeah, and being able to still love and care for somebody whose viewpoint is really, really, really different. Okay, this is from Alan. Thank you for inviting Juliane to your radio show. I've heard many interesting stories in my life, but Juliane's path to become a psychotherapist is outstanding, amazing. Does self-discipline fall in internal boundary category? And is there an association between insightfulness, wisdom, with creating internal boundaries?
Ooh, I love this question.
I know. I'm telling you, our listeners are awesome.
So amazing. So, one, yes, I would say generally self-discipline. Let's talk about that a little bit. And I want to break down what I mean. So, there's two pieces of, especially in our internal boundary work, I think of them as commitments. Do you want to commit to practices that are going to, over time, shift your neural networks to create permanent brain change? Because it does take a little bit of time to learn. From moving from a skill to honing a neural network takes about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, depends on your brain. But committing to a bigger practice where you do this for years, if you want to change your brain permanently, we're talking about a 2 to 3 year road. So there is something in that. And I think of it, when I think of that self-discipline, I think for me, it sits as a commitment to my own growth, or a commitment to how I want to show up in relationships. And do I commit enough that I'm willing to put in this little effort? And I try to build practices that you can use very quickly. So it may be a 20-second practice, but if you use it a lot and keep committed to it, it'll change your brain in big, big ways over time.
I love that. I actually agree that those tiny fragments of exercise or change formulas can actually help a person pivot to a very radically different place emotionally, psychologically, physiologically, neurologically. And the daily practice is, I've got a whole series on daily practice and how absolutely crucial it is to making a long-term difference in your life. And I'm talking now specifically where it comes to looking at post-trauma response, and the difference I see between clients who really say, no, I'm going to do the work. You're telling me to try these three practices. I'm going to do them. I'm going to do them every single day. And then I see such powerful shifts with people who take it on, as opposed to people who say, you know what, I went home, but I either forgot, or it was really hard, or got distracted. So they're not putting themselves in their lives as a priority. So that becomes the work, right? Instead of it being the actual practice, the practice becomes, why are you falling off on care for yourself? What is that about the way you relate to yourself? So that comes from a different place, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and I talk quite a lot in the book about in containing boundary work, which is the work that I'm asking folks to do between themselves and them. So putting a pause between the feeling and that oomph towards behavior that sometimes we'll do stuff that's outside of our integrity. So maybe I get angry and then all of a sudden I'm yelling, but yelling isn't how I want to show up. Can we put a pause between that feeling of anger and the yelling? Or this is more my way. I might feel scared and then shut down and not say anything. Could I put a pause between that fear response and my shutdown? So that I can choose whether or not I want to lean into my value system. And does that tell me, say something, Jules, right? So I can put a pause and actually end up opening up my containing boundary more, moving more towards porosity and saying more when I use that containing boundary. And for folks, I think we hear a lot about using willpower to make change. And neurobiologically, that just doesn't make a lot of sense, because it creates excitatory neuro patterns in your subcortical system. So if you want to, basically the layperson version of this, if you want to light your lower brain on fire, use willpower, which is tough, because the truth is if I use willpower at the beginning, it actually gives me positive feedback. It works until it doesn't. Because my excitatory neurochemical pattern is so much, I've lit my lower brain on fire, eventually I'll fall off. What the research shows is actually compassion plus slowing down and making some really solid choices is what leads to behavior change. So we start in our containing boundary work with greeting ourselves with compassion and then double checking against value system really fast, so that you can start to behave in ways that you feel really proud of and can grow trust in yourself.
Powerful. I want to talk about your 6 steps to setting an external boundary, and then we'll get back to some more emails because I've got a bunch of them lined up.
Sure.
Step 1, find your big why. Step 2, define your action. Step 3, anticipate potential responses. Step 4, anticipate your own reactions. Step 5, create a self-soothing plan. And step 6, say it again and follow through. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So the book talks in lots of detail about it, but we'll give a brief overview. So find your big why. So the truth of how the brain works, I face hard realities with people and then try to find ways to solve them. Your brain guesses that near to you now in time pain is bigger than far away pain. So let's say the right now pain is, I say something about this not feeling okay for me. Ooh, that's an uncomfortable conversation. Yuck. The consequence of not doing it is building so much resentment, I no longer want to be in a relationship with you. That's a bigger pain. But the problem is your brain does not actually process it that way. It goes, avoid the near pain at all costs. So
Good point.
we need an oomphy, emotionally huge big why. And that big why better balance out how scary it is to do the boundary. And if it's big enough, it'll outweigh that pain avoidance stuff our brain is doing. So that's why we start with, can you find a good reason for you that you need to do this thing? That's your big why. Second step, define your action. So this is all about, okay, so this thing is happening. It's not going to change. How are you going to respond to it? And that's really, this piece feels like so much grief work. I think a lot of folks want boundaries. If I set the boundary, then the other person's going to change. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes it doesn't. And so when I think about boundary work, I think about it not as what you're asking somebody else to do. That's a direct request. I think about boundaries as what am I going to do because the not okay thing is happening. So defining your action is all about, hey, can I name what's okay for me about the situation? What's not okay for me about the situation? What am I going to do when the not okay thing happens? So there's defining your action. And then a lot of times when I'm working, so I do small group work where 6 or 8 people come together and do an in-depth workshop with me on these things, right? And pretty much every time we spend a lot of time on the big why and a lot of time on defining their action, and people feel so good. At the end of this, they go, great, I'm done, right? I'm like, no, there's still 4 steps to go because we won't set boundaries that stick unless we create some guesses about what we're going to expect to happen and then how to take care of ourselves in the face of that. So a lot of times what's going to happen is somebody's going to try to push back on you. I have a 10-year-old daughter. She pushes back on whatever boundary I set at least 5 or 6 times before she gives up. That is just the norm.
And it's good. I think what you're saying right now is really helpful because it would be unreasonable for there not to be a response, but sometimes people get shut down as soon as they get a response or a pushback. And it's funny because they're in therapy. If I'm working with somebody on a kind of like an empty chair or an interactional dialogue, which pushes the boundaries and helps people understand that they can state something, I always play a role where I push back 3, 4, 5, 6 times so that they feel the feeling and do it anyways. And that is a very powerful thing for an individual to live with because they start to understand that they can have that feeling without it destroying them. And in fact, it shows them what they're capable of.
Right, exactly. You'll gain so much self-confidence and self-trust, really, when you can really hold to the boundaries. But I think it does take these next steps where I guess I take some guesses at how the other person might respond. And they're just guesses. They're not right, but they're guesses, right? And the whole reason we do that is so that we can support the next step, which is, hey, what emotional responses am I going to have if that thing happens? And then step 5, we create a soothing plan. How am I going to take care of that feeling in the moment? And it might have a gesture with it, and it might have a little moment of remembering a big why. Oh, remember why you're doing this? It might have some compassion in it to help calm down that lower part of your brain. It might have some psychological boundary work where I keep that feedback I'm getting over there and wonder if it's actually true and actually about me. So I might create, the soothing plan inside where I take care of myself so that I follow through with step 6. Go ahead and say it again, stay with your action, do the thing. So if I've told my daughter, nope, we're not going to watch Bluey until after brushing teeth. And she goes, yeah, but we're already here on the couch and it's so cuddly. I know, baby, but we're getting ready for bed now. So before we watch our Bluey episode, we're going to go brush our teeth, right? And I can stay with that and stay with that and stay with that until we go ahead and move forward with our night.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's a boundary-ish image?
Oh, a boundary image. So this plays with a really interesting way that the right temporal lobe processes information. So the hub of your mentalization neural network, that's a fancy way for saying the part of your brain that guesses what other people are thinking and feeling. This network is housed, its hub, its seed origin spot is in a part of your brain that processes imagery. And imagery, I want us to think of broadly. I've had people come up with sound images. I've had people come up with gesture images, and of course, picture images. I've even had some people who don't actually do imagery that well feel through like, well, I think it's kind of feels like this-ish, or maybe they're hyperverbal and they might come up with a word and float the word in between themselves and other people. So I want us to think of the word images in a broad way and just know, ooh, this part of the brain speaks image. And what I ask folks to do is to do a practice where they're going to discover for themselves an image that knows how to discern what's true and not true, what's about me and not about me. And the same image knows how I want to show up in respect for other people as their minds are doing their thing, as they become themselves through time. How do I treat that with whatever respect looks like for me? So I ask people to find the image through an exercise, and I have actually never had the same image show up twice.
What kind of images do you get?
Oh my gosh, they are so wild. I've had fences and waterfalls and ocean scenes. And I've also had a tortoise hanging on the edge of a glass of milk, and a dinosaur bird, and a kangaroo hopping over an apple. And I had one where there was an apple in the scene, but the cat kept running around it in a circle. I do not know. Mine, by the way, is a pink wall of sparkly jello. It's
there we go.
Why. And I don't know why. To this day, I do not know why. But I'll tell you what. For whatever reason, my lower brain knows that image knows how to do this. And so,
would you conjure, if you're finding that you're struggling with a boundary issue, or something gets triggered in terms of your boundary rigidity or porousness, might you call up that image to help you deal with something?
Exactly. So I can float that image in between me and other people, in between me and the computer, so I don't get caught in all that online hard stuff, right? I can float that image. I can bring up that image into my mind's eye and really imagine it between me and the world, and it increases my safety in the subconscious perception. So this is like a wild piece of data, but your brain is guessing how okay you are. Hey, am I safe? Am I not safe? 4 to 5 times per second. I know, just sit with that for a second. Wait, while we're talking in this sentence, your brain already did this double check like 50 times. right? So your brain is constantly guessing, am I okay? Am I not okay? And then how much integration is available is actually as a result of that assessment. So your brain is guessing, hey, am I okay or not okay? How safe am I? And the psychological boundary increased safety. And then on the other side of that, your brain, if it's going, oh, I'm more safe than I thought I was, it goes, got it. I'll do the more integrated processes, nuanced thinking, communication, connection, bonding skills, creative thought. And now all these resources are available to me because I added that layer of psychological protection.
Beautiful. In your book, you reference Siegel saying one of the first skills we lose in an unintegrated brain state is the ability to pause between feeling and doing. When people feel concerned that something is about to go wrong, their brain becomes unintegrated to add speed. The added speed is great if you're dealing with if you're physically threatened, but costly in difficult emotional interactions. So how do we add that pause?
Right. We add it with a containing boundary. We want to put a pause between feeling and doing. And I have people develop a practice. It's going to be unique to every person. It's going to have three components. One is a reminder of compassion that we put into movement so that it works at subcortical speeds, a reminder of compassion, and a reminder of who do I want to be? What's my personal integrity? And a reminder of how do I want to show up in relationship? What is my relational intention? And I have people create a practice where they're going to discover a quick way to remind themselves of three components. Compassion, it's going to help you slow down. Value system, hey, who do I want to be in the world? And relational intention, how do I want to show up with other people? A really fast way, once you build it and start practicing it, you can access it. Most people, it takes 1 to 3 seconds to actually do the practice once they've discovered it.
That's that practice piece where you really lean towards making this real for yourself, not just hearing about it, getting the instruction, but actually leaning into it and making it real for yourself so that you can use it when you really need it. Because most of us, when we really need something, and of course, this goes back to brain science, parts of our brain will literally shut down when we need it the most. But if you've got a highly practiced skill set, you can actually access skills that you have habitually practiced when you didn't need it.
Yes.
I have a question from one of our listeners.
I'm excited.
Michelle. This one's really good. I like it. It relates to my life, actually.
Oh, wonderful.
Really enjoying the show this afternoon. My question, a little bit off topic. What breed of dog does Jules have? I am just curious.
I have a dog named Layla. She is a rescue. We know that she is part pointer, but we do not know what else she might have. She does herding behaviors, so I'm wondering if there is some herd dog in her. And we've had her for 5 years, and I picked her up in a Target parking lot during COVID because a family gave her up, and she is magical. My dog is the sweetest dog.
Oh, I'm so glad you have a magical dog. Oh my goodness, that's such a nice story. I'm a big dog lover, so when I got this question, I had to ask you. And how did Michelle know that you had a dog? Because you didn't mention it.
I don't know that I did, but I think probably my website has that I have a dog.
Okay.
I probably put it in a bio somewhere. And I talk about Layla often. So that is, it would not be surprising if people know, oh yeah, Jules has a dog named Layla. Yeah, she's a pointer mix of some kind, and we don't know what kind, and I've never done the DNA test. She's 60 pounds and she is a cuddle dog, and she's loving and deeply kind.
Not everybody is into dogs, but I do find that they enhance life quite a bit. So, They're a sweet addition to a person's home. This one is to myself and Jules, and
Yeah,
this is from Daredevil. Daredevil says, I just went to Jules' website. Her office space looks very inviting. Is her book still available? Yes.
absolutely.
Is your book on audio as well?
It is. It's on audio, and the person who read it does a great job. I've gotten lots of positive feedback from folks I know in my life who have listened to the Audible book, and they're like, "Oh, you didn't read it, but it was great because this actor read it great," and so awesome. So yes, it's
That's really nice.
Audible. Yeah, it's on Audible, and it's wherever. If you like to shop local, it's in local bookstores. The spread is wide as far as where you can find it, and of course on Amazon and Target and all that. Yeah,
And I love when a book does go to audio recording, because you can exercise, you can go for a walk, you can do your cooking, whatever's going on, and you can take it in. We have to stop, Jules. It has been an absolutely delightful conversation. Is there anything that you'd finally like to say to our listeners before we finish today?
just so much gratitude to you and to everybody listening. Thank you for being kind and giving us your attention and listening in.
Thank you so much, Jules. I hope that everybody has a great day. Enjoy yourself, be kind to yourself, and hey, practice those 6 steps, and maybe change your life by reading Setting Boundaries That Stick. Thank you for joining us, Jules. Be well, everybody. See you next month. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.